we've got some really interesting people talking with us, and essentially two presentations, and we're really fortunate to be joined live by two friends from the United States. And but to introduce the first session is Kevin Murphy. He's going to tell us all about that, and because these people are joining from afar, we might stop and have questions and discussions about the first presentation before we move on to the second presentation. But there's going to be plenty of time for everything. Kevin, welcome again.
Thank you, Ian. Good morning, everyone. When I got the invitation to come speak yesterday, Mark Bentley said, well, I'd also appreciate if you do a breakout on the Berks County Community Foundation's Youth in Philanthropy program, which we call our Youth Advisory Committee. And Ian called, and I spoke by Skype about 2 weeks ago or so to plan this. And honestly, the thought of me talking for 30 minutes about our Youth Philanthropy program bored even me to tears. And nobody likes listening to me more than I do. So I really thought that we would take advantage of the unique opportunity that technology affords us to let you hear about our Youth Advisory Committee from two people who know far more about it than I do and are far better spokespeople for it than I am, two members of our Youth Advisory Committee. Our committee was organized in 1998. It's similar to Youth Advisory Committees that were established all around the state of Michigan by a Council on Michigan Foundations initiative organized by the Kellogg Foundation and the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation in the United States. If you sort of scan the field of youth philanthropy, you'll find youth advisory committees scattered in community foundations around the United States. You'll find about between 8 and 12 of them in the Russian Federation. You'll find them scattered all across Eastern Europe. You will ultimately trace much of this activity to a man named Vernon Ringland at the Northern Ireland Community Foundation, who, if you can imagine, 20 or 25 years ago, started a youth grant-making program comprised in Belfast of 50% Protestant children and 50% Catholic children. And if you think to what the environment was like then, that was a fairly bold move. Vernon doesn't lack for ambition. Not too long ago, he started a youth philanthropy program in the Sudan, which has been a challenge. So you will find these in various forms all around the country, and in the United States, and then all around the world. And it's probably one of the fastest growing parts of the community foundation movement. Let me introduce the two students from Berks County who are joining us. The attractive one is a young lady named Stacy Weichel. Stacy is a junior at Antietam High School, which is one of the smaller of our 18 high schools in the county. She is one of the very best students we have in Berks County. In addition to being a junior at Antietam High School, she's part of the way through her freshman year at the Pennsylvania State University, which is what she does on the side. I think she plays basketball. She's a writer for the local newspaper for their youth section, and will be with us in our Youth Advisory Committee for one more year. The other one, the not attractive one, is a senior at Tulpehocken High School. He'll be graduating in a few weeks and attending Pennsylvania State University in the fall. It is his fourth year in our Youth Advisory Committee. He has been with us twice to Russia to help us establish youth advisory committees. That is my oldest son, Carver. He has an identical twin, but much better looking brother. So guys, tell us about YAC.
All right, well, my dad went over a little bit about the history of the Youth Advisory Committee. Can you hear us? All right. But certainly when we were founded is not the most important thing about us. The most important thing, I think, would be the work we do in the community year to year. Every year we're given $15,000 by the Community Foundation to distribute to nonprofits around the county. based on a proposal or a theme that we decide as a group at the beginning of the year that we want to focus on.
On that note, our RFP, which is our request for proposal, is like what he said, what we all come up with. And then we kind of all vote on one with the most popular problem within Berks County. And we focus on just one idea every single year. This past year we had Healthy Eats, and what that based on was healthy education, the obesity and
hunger and eating disorders. Yeah. So as a group, we decided that was a prevalent problem in the community, and that we wanted to try to help tackle that. So our wonderful advisor, who's actually sitting here, you can't see her, Sarah McCausland, asked nonprofits across the county if they had programs that were that fit this theme, and we got 20 responses to go look at programs, and about $120,000 in requests for grants. So that was a big problem because we only had $15,000.
so therefore, that's why we go on site visits and we go and visit these nonprofits to see if these programs actually fit the RFP, if they are what they are, and eventually we come together at the end of the year and our decision day or D-Day, and we figure out which ones we really want to give. We want to split the $15,000 amongst.
Yeah, that's about half of what we do. That's the grant making part. The other part is development. So we go out. Actually, the members of VIAC identify many of the target possible donors, I think is the politically correct term. We identify where we think the money is, and we go and we ask them for money, and that's probably the hardest part of what we do, and because it's very nerve-wracking. We ask for this money because at some point, and we're about halfway there, we'd like to raise $500,000 for the youth fund, and that would bring in interest of about $25,000 a year to use in grant making. So we will no longer be then dependent on the community foundations $15,000 a year that they give us, and we'll actually be able to give out $25,000, which is even more than we normally do.
What do you mean? Normally we get together, and these are students from across all Berks County. I think we have like 18 schools this year represented, at least one person from each school. And we normally do meetings on a Sunday night for about 2 hours, and it's not that long, but it's very interesting, and you get things done within the meetings.
Yeah, we do.
We do run them.
We run them ourselves. Stacy and I are both your team leader. Yeah, Stacy and I can't remember if she was team leader this year or last year. But both of us are team leaders. I have 6 team leaders, and we each go out with our teams and visit the sites, but each of us is in charge of running a meeting at some point during the year, and we write up the agenda and completely run the meeting ourselves, which is a really big learning aspect of being a team leader.
Especially becoming like in YAC, and like being a team leader and running a meeting kind of gets you more of an overview of what we are doing for the day or the night, and what you should be having the other students there now.
Yeah, do you have any questions? I think questions are always easier to answer than talking about it.
And we'd like to ask you to do, just for technical reasons, if you have a question, come on up here and we'll put you at the podium. Otherwise, the kids can't see you. Okay.
Okay, Ian.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in first. That's terrific, guys. Thank you so much for talking, and I appreciate you can't see who you're talking to, so it makes it really tricky. But just for, I'd really encourage people to come up and ask questions, and if you can, bear to look in that camera just down there sitting on top of the laptop so that you can eyeball them. It's very tricky. But I've got a start off question, which is two parts. One is, what do you think makes it work so well? What are the factors that make your youth committee work so well? And the second part of the question is, what could make it work even better?
Why if it works so well, what can make it work
Yeah.
better? This youth led. You guys are all really passionate.
Yeah, I think the key to the youth advisory committee, the key to its success, the key to our success in the organization and our ability to learn is that it is youth led. We have the team leaders and we run these meetings. We do most of the work. I think really what we just don't do is the paperwork. That's the only thing we don't do. We make all the decisions, and I think that's the key to the learning aspect of it and making it work so well. And certainly we all become better friends and learn how to work with each other in a more professional environment than maybe school. I think that's the big thing of why it works so well.
It's the fact that you have everybody that has so much passion for one thing, that you all have everybody coming together, and you all share the same interests, more or less, no matter your differences.
Right? There's a cue forming.
Hi guys, you're in demand. I'm keen just to find out a little bit more about your plans to establish the $500,000 fund. So for example, whose idea was it? How was the idea generated? And what support are you getting from the Community Foundation? And also, third part, what's the response of the potential donors that you have spoken to so far? I know you're halfway there, but is it a hard sell or is it, are you getting a good positive response?
Okay, so in 2000, Sarah tells me that we started in 2002. I don't know whose idea it was. The Yak advisor at the time, I believe. And now $500,000, I'm sure you all know, is a difficult goal to reach. It's a lot of money. And the money comes from just $3,000, $5,000 contributions at a time.
You had won $30,000.
We did have, our largest, I believe, was $30,000 at one time. Was that from a business? Yeah, it's from a donor. And the goal is mostly to become self-sufficient and to be able to give out more money each year than we do now. But yeah, what else do we? I mean, the foundation houses us. That's the help we get. But
the donors and I sit down with Kevin and go over past asks, make sure that we don't ask the same people.
Oh yeah, and the Community Foundation makes sure that we don't bleed people dry of their money. They make sure we only ask every couple of years, and we don't ask the same people over and over again. And I think one of the most important things actually about it would be the development process. Stacey, would you agree that learning how to ask for money is probably one of the most important things we can get from it?
Yeah, it is one of the important things. Everybody fundraises in school, and like $1 for this, $1 for that. This is more or less asking people for thousands of dollars out of their pockets in their home environment. So it's more of a, like, it's not really scary or anything like that, but it's more just like the impact that they could be giving their money to youth, and that they trust us well enough to give it to other companies or nonprofits within the area to help better youth and other people.
Thank
You're welcome.
Hello. I've got a two-part question. What is the demographic of people that you're making gifts to, and how do you measure success? Do you revisit the donees of your gifts, and do you ask them to report back to you? And as I say, how do you measure success?
Well, Stacy actually knows this a little bit better than I do, because she lives in the city of Reading. But the city of Reading sits in the center of Berks County and is the 6th poorest city in the United States now. It was at one point the poorest city in the United States, and that's our biggest. I think the biggest population that we serve. Outside of Reading, we certainly serve people outside of Reading. It's I'm getting some feedback here, but because Reading is so poor, they have a lot of nonprofits, and the organizations that we try to help the community is targeted toward the city. So I think that's who we. Can you answer the other question?
The nonprofits give back grant reports, and you guys reviewed them this year to evaluate whether your grant had an impact.
Okay. Well, something new that we added this year at one of our meetings was the fact that we went back a few years and we looked at how well these nonprofits succeeded with the money that we gave them. Each team, I think, at least got one. And we went through a worksheet saying, okay, like, what did they do? What was the program? And how successful was it? How many people are they still running the program? Questions similar to that.
Was it fun? Did you learn anything?
The learning experience from that was more or less that that youth, the people in the youth advisory committee could finally see what actually happened with the money, and to see where that money really went to, and if they spent it for the right reasons or the reasons that we wanted them to.
Yeah, I think we really learned some of the programs we've been funding for years. We learned whether or not they're actually effective, and that was huge because every year Sarah interviews new people for the position of team leader, and several of us, myself included, said, we've been in this now for 3 or 4 years, and we don't know if we're making a difference. We don't know what the impact we're having is, and we really wanted to know. So the Community Foundation had been getting the grant reports, but we had never seen them, and we decided we wanted to see them this year. We reviewed them, and that was good because now we know some of the programs we have funded in the past are not as productive as we thought they would be, and some that we had been kind of shaky on made more of an impact than we thought they were going to.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much.
Hi guys, it's been really interesting to hear what you had to say so far. I'm just interested from the perspective of being in a youth organisation myself. For each of you personally, what have you found to be maybe one highlight and one challenge each for you personally of working for the Youth Advisory Committee?
Highlight and challenge.
One challenge for me would mostly be the driving aspect of it, because I don't drive. I drive.
Yeah, me neither. I can understand that challenge.
Highlight.
And a highlight. I think one of my highlights of YAC would be like having the chance to meet with everybody and getting to know the people that you normally wouldn't see in your normal daily school aspect. Like Kevin said earlier, I go to one of the smallest schools in Berks County, so my graduating class is about 50 people. So the people that I meet in YAC, really, they're not like the people I go to school with, and they have more of like an impact like in the community, and they more or less know more about the community than I would have known, at least at the beginning of my freshman year.
So Stacy and I actually both go to the smallest and second smallest schools in the county, both in very poor, less educated areas of the county. And I certainly do not deal with some of these are some of the smartest kids in the county, and we don't get to on a daily basis deal with these kids. So I think one of the great things about it has been the meeting new kids of the same level of intellect as us, and I think learning about philanthropy and the leadership involved in it, that was also, I mean, an amazing thing. Being a team leader was a great opportunity, and I think at the same time that's the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge for me was probably being able, getting out there and leading these kids and talking to these people that and doing this work. And certainly we're gearing up towards the end of, we've made our decisions on our budget and the board approved that, so D-Day is over, but we still have more to do. We still have development left, and myself and some other team leaders are going to do some outreach for YAC. So these are even more challenges that we've actually brought upon ourselves because we volunteered to Sarah that we do this, but these are great challenges, and I think this one have been certainly one of the best opportunities I've had to be a part of.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, hi to you both. There are two parts to what I want to ask. The first is, I'm not clear on whether you are acting reactively or proactively. I think reactively, have you considered being more proactive in determining the direction that youth in your area goes? And secondly, given that you've already demonstrated a success in fundraising, have you considered asking the Community Foundation to match you dollar for dollar on what you do out?
It's a good idea. I will be talking when I get home. You get home. I actually, that reactive, proactive question is interesting. And I would say we're probably mostly reactive. I think we, for the most part, are asked to identify problems in the community amongst youth and see how we can help fix that. I think, actually, you can say something, I'm sure, but my brother, for the RFP this year, his idea was that we try to encourage involvement in community organizations such as student councils, YAC, NHS, which is National Honor Society. So I think that was probably the most proactive idea I've heard. He really tried to get that to be our theme this year. But hungry children wins over the hearts and minds of the kids here. But that's an interesting question, and I actually never. Thank you for saying that, because I've never really thought of it. That we do a lot of reactive.
There are just that being young people in your community, you would be able to identify yourselves areas that needed attention. For example, you might have a lot of street kids. You could put a skate park in and that type of thing to get them off the street. That's just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, guys, thank you very much for joining us. I know you had to come in late in the evening. Sarah, thanks for helping set this up. Carver, make sure that you clean your bedroom up when you get home.
It's spotless.
Okay. Carver, Stacy, thank you very much for joining us.
And I hope you can hear all that applause. I think it's been quite inspirational, actually. There's not a lot of examples of the kind of thing that you're engaged in New Zealand, but I think there's probably an interest in developing them. Somehow we just haven't got onto it enough. So it's been quite an inspiration, and we really appreciate you giving us your time and your wisdom. Thank you. Also to Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's part one. That was pretty amazing, eh? I think part two is going to be pretty interesting too. Part two is sort of a change of tack, but it's all about the young people, so I'm going to not attempt to describe it. We'll have Emily and Keith. Oh, you've got a presentation for us?
Yes.
Excellent, great. And so it started me thinking, I'm just planning for time now, started me thinking about what does philanthropy mean, because this is a good example of young people using their energy and their time and their knowledge and wisdom to help make a difference to the world, partly by giving money away. Okay, so that's philanthropy, however you look at it, in 3 different layers. I think our next presenters don't have any money to give away, although if you'd like to change that situation for them, I'm sure they'd be happy. But they are still giving their energy and time and wisdom and commitment. And I think philanthropy has been some of the fuel in their tank as well. So welcome to Keith and Emily from Justice League.
We might just need a minute to have a little technical conversation, so talk amongst yourselves.
If you need to.
It's just, yeah,
Okay.
we just need to take this off automatic.
Oh, okay, well, I'll just sing in a second. Let me just fill in, and I'll be happy to answer questions about the program afterwards. The kids, I love that they think the goal is $500,000 for their fundraising. When they hit $500,000, we're going to tell them it's $750,000 or $1 million or something like that. The real point is to get them educated and understanding that fundraising is part of community involvement as well as distribution. We don't want them to think that the money dropped out of the sky. It's been, and I'll be happy to talk about this later. It started out as we thought a nice idea to involve youth. It's turned into one of our more effective grant-making programs this year. In addition to the $15,000 that the kids allocated, they've come to our staff with about $18,000 in additional grants that they had vetted, that they thought would be matches for other funds in the community foundation that are likely to be funded. They are very rigorous in their site visits, so they've actually helped us become much better grant makers. Because of them, we received a national funding block for lesbian and gay funding for youth, which the kids administered. So it's been a wonderful thing for us. And of course, we're also training a next generation of philanthropists. I'll share with you one of our graduates from last year. I ran into her mother, and she's off at college. And she was frustrated at a class. She said, "Mom, these kids don't know anything. Some of them don't even know what an RFP is." Have I filled enough time up there for you? Okay. Well, I've anything to fill it out.
Tēnā koutou katoa. So firstly, thank you very much for having us here today. And I guess we'd like to start today in the bigger sense of explain why we're here and why we think that you should be interested in listening to us. So firstly,
we just want to talk a little bit to the problem that our organisation is out to address. So firstly, we see that there are problems in the criminal justice system, and despite crime being actually on the decrease, we have an incredibly high incarceration rate in New Zealand, surprisingly high. And we think this is both economically ineffective and it doesn't stop reoffending, and particularly not so for Māori.
also, we believe that public perception of safety are out of sync with reality. So there are a small percentage of New Zealanders, 5%, are victims of major crime. And although that's not to minimise the effect on those 5% of victims, there's 57% of New Zealanders who feel say that they feel safe, and that's comparable to rates in Iran and Bulgaria.
We're also saddened by many of the statistics about the backgrounds of people who come before us in the criminal justice system, and that fact there in particular, I think, is particularly shocking to us as young people. And finally, we think that the criminal justice debate is often quite reactionary and polarised, and it's often set as being an offenders versus victims type scenario. And we think that we could do with better reporting and better standards in terms of how we actually think of the criminal justice system and offenders' rights in New Zealand.
So I guess for us, after, that's just for kind of snippets of issues that we see out there in the New Zealand community. And I guess for Emily and I and many other young people who have been involved in Just Speak, we couldn't hear those facts and read those statistics and I guess learn about the failures of the criminal justice system and do nothing. We thought that we needed to respond in some way, and that is why Just Speak essentially was formed. So I thought it would be rude not to talk a little bit about ourselves quickly and just give you a bit of a basis of who we are and why we're perhaps passionate about these issues. So my name is Heath Hutton, and I'm the Youth Development Coordinator at an organisation called Challenge 2000. Some of you guys might be familiar with this foundation because you might know us. We are a professional youth development and social work agency, mainly based in Wellington, and our main, aims are bringing about personal dignity, social justice, social responsibility. I work with kind of two distinct groups, but also groups that are very much are quite similar. Firstly, I work in the youth justice sector, in youth court and the like. I run a few different programs in that kind of sector, and also work in youth development, training up youth workers and making sure that they're equipped to help young people reach their full potential. I studied at Victoria University and have a background in law and psychology, and I guess all of my experiences being involved in Challenge 2000 and seeing the difference that interventions can make and positive role models, and I guess it might sound trite, but a little bit of love and acceptance of young people can make. I was really interested by the failure of the criminal justice system, and so I became really passionate about it, and that is why I'm involved in Just Speak.
And as for me, so I also chair Just Speak along with Heath. And my background and my interest in Just Speak, I guess, comes from a bit of a history of volunteering in other organisations while at law school. So one that I think is slightly of interest and is of relevance to today's discussion is the Wellington Community Justice Project. I was part of a group of law students at Victoria who identified a lack of, who identified both a need for some more support for projects in the community that were giving free legal advice or legal advocacy, and a want for students to get some practice and development. So we set up this project called the Wellington Community Justice Project, which gives students volunteer opportunities in those 4 areas. And I think that was really where I started being involved in organisations and community organisations and their development. So naturally, also with a background in law, I was really interested in the criminal justice system, and through this work and involving young people and talking about the criminal justice system. So that's what brought me to Just Speak. But just going back a couple of slides, who actually are we? Who is Just Speak? So Just Speak is a non-partisan network of young people. They're aged from high school age to around about their late 20s, though we're not in any way exclusive, so everybody is welcome to be a part of Just Speak, young and young at heart. And the idea behind Just Speak is speaking up for a new generation of thinkers who want change in our criminal justice system. We formed in 2011 as a branch of the adults criminal reform organisation, Rethinking Crime and Punishment, and we'll talk a bit more to that in just a minute. We have branches in Wellington and Auckland, and we're about to start a scoping exercise, Heath and I, in a couple of weeks' time in Christchurch and Dunedin to see if there's any desire to have Just Speak or something like Just Speak down there.
So you may be asking yourself, and as Ian alluded, why are we here? We're not really in the business of grant making, and we don't have any money to give anyone. However, I guess for us, we think it's important that we're representing a group of young people who receive grants and very generous grants. The foundation supports us a lot, and I understand Sir John might be in the room. He's gone, unfortunately, but we pay tribute, I guess, to him and the impact that the Toll Foundation has had on our organisation. I guess so. We receive grants, and we also believe that Just Speak is an example of philanthropy. So not so much in the traditional sense of the word, but more so in the terms of how young people give their time and energy towards a cause. And we feel that this fits really well with the topic of the conference, philanthropy, doing more than just giving, which I guess alludes to the emphasis and the changing face of philanthropy. So our kaupapa, mā te tika o te toki o te tangi, i te toho o te panaho, ka pai te tiri o te waka I ngā momo moana katoa. By designing and shaping the keel of the waka to perfection, your canoe will overcome obstacles. And this whakatio proverb articulates the need to design the keel of our organisation Just Speak to perfection, so that our group can overcome obstacles and maintain a durable voice in the criminal justice conversation. This proverb also points to the need for the keel of a bigger waka, the criminal justice system itself, to be designed carefully so that it can provide a sustainable vehicle to rehabilitate and reintegrate members of society who have offended. You'll see our mission up there, which is, as Emily has mentioned, we're all about empowering young people and a new generation of thinkers to speak out for change in the criminal justice system. And that's to be informed by evidence and experience towards our ultimate goal, which is a more just Aotearoa.
So you'll be able to read on the screen here our objectives, and they align very much with, I think, what he and I have just spoken to. So we'll just give you a second to read through them before we progress on. The artwork in this slide was designed by young people at our camp last year, which we're going to talk to a little bit more in a minute.
So what do we do to recognise these objectives? Well, firstly, we hold monthly forums, which are public, open to everybody. They're free. We try and make them interactive as possible, and we also provide free kai, which is really important. We comment publicly on relevant criminal justice issues and submit on legislation before Parliament. We go out to communities and groups of young people and consult with them so that we can have their voices heard in this debate. Last year, for instance, we interviewed 100 young people in child, youth and family care and other youth community groups to get their thoughts on the government's youth crime action plan. We also produce substantive pieces of work which are available in the public domain. For instance, our position paper, Māori in the Criminal Justice System, which we released last year at our launch. As I've alluded to, we have an emphasis on partnering with existing organisations as well. For example, the Office of the Children's Commissioner, who we did that consultation with earlier. And I guess one of our main things that we're really on about is creating opportunities for young people to get together and develop their skills. We hold a free national camp every year, and this picture is from the camp last year. And there's an emphasis on discussing these criminal justice issues in a really accessible, non-threatening way, so that people who may not have knowledge in these areas don't feel like they are alienated because the conversations are too intellectual or above their head.
But ultimately, then we also intended to bring young people up to the level where they were speaking in Parliament. So we had spoken word poetry, theatre, music, and some public speeches that young people had written throughout the camp were presented in Parliament. So that's right.
We also coordinated a high school competition, and this was really effective in getting young people to feel like they can contribute to the criminal justice debate. So Emily will talk a little bit about our history.
Cool. So this is us essentially when we started. What happened was Rethinking Crime and Punishment put out a call for young people. Basically, they thought there's a voice missing in the criminal justice debate, and that's the voice of young people. So they held a meeting in 2011 for people who were interested to form a youth branch. And in the first months of Just Speak's existence, and indeed on an ongoing basis, but particularly in those first 6 months, we should really acknowledge Rethinking Crime and Punishment, or the Robson Hannon Trust, which is the legal entity. So essentially at the outset supported us in our entirety. So they fully funded us, which included organisational costs, Kai at our monthly forums, and other associated costs linked to us at the outset. And then they also supported us in a non-financial way, and most predominantly through providing us with mentoring, strategic advice. They had hired a young person at the time who was working on grant applications and things like that, and she taught us, I guess, how to put in a grant application, which was what led us at the end of our first 6 months to be very fortunate to receive the funding that we did from the Todd Foundation. Subsequently to that, so after our first year, 2011, we were funded for a further 2 years from the Todd Foundation, which is really exciting for us because we feel like we can now see a real future to what we're doing, and we can keep on growing what we're doing. So in the first year of our organisation, the membership of Just Speak grew quite organically. So the group of people who were really involved in organising and running it was basically these people who you'll see here on the screen. And our monthly forums were attended by about 30 to, in one case, 100 people, which was pretty exciting. But this is where, here's where we are today.
So, as Emily said, we've over the past year, or couple of years, we've grown enormously, and to the point now where we receive roughly about 5 emails a week or a week from people willing to volunteer and wanting to know how they can help. We have around 60 young people who are actively and quite intensively working for Just Speak. All of this is voluntary. As we've grown, by necessity, we've had to develop our organisation, and we've developed this in a way that is split into different work streams so that we can get things done and also effectively measure our outputs and how well our approach is doing. So this is our organisational diagram, and it shows the 5 project streams. One is focused on youth justice issues. One is focused on beyond prisons and exploring alternatives to incarceration. And so those were the 2 main projects that we wanted to focus on this year. Our steering group, and actually it was our working group, got together at our annual triangle. We have 3 retreats a year, but at one of the retreats we got together and decided that we'd focus on those 2 areas this year. We have a response team which is responsible for responding to issues that come up and putting out media releases. We have an outreach team that is specifically responsible for trying to create opportunities for young people to engage with this conversation and reach out to those that perhaps aren't represented as well in this conversation of criminal justice. We have a camp team, as this is one of our major highlights of the year, and is quite logistically quite a big thing. We have 150 people usually. So this is our working group, some of really, who came away to a retreat to focus on how we can more effectively get the work done. So today, it's a little bit about the organisation, but I guess the main reason why we thought would be useful here is to give our thoughts on how we engage with young people in philanthropy and how effectively we can do that in these organisations, and also to give you a little bit of an insight, if you don't already know some of the challenges associated with these organisations that we think you need to be aware of.
So firstly, just some your thoughts on volunteering with young people. What from our experience do young people want and do they need? So firstly, we say young people need to be able to own their organisation, and I think the Youth Advisory Committee example today is the perfect example of that, essentially. So although I've talked about us in a sense of being a youth branch of Robson Hannon Trust, we like to see ourselves as being two branches of the Robson Hannon Trust, Just Speak and Rethinking Crime and Punishment. And I guess one thing that we don't respond well to as young people is being seen as being just the branch, and that's one thing that we think that the Robson Hannon Trust has been able to really effectively work with us on doing. And that's also tied into the idea of independence, and that it's really important that we have the authority to know our own decisions and that young people are trusted to be making important decisions. Secondly, we think that a really positive thing about working with young people is that often we're quite idealistic in a positive sense. We believe things can happen, and we work towards making them happen. It's really important for young people to be respected and acknowledged, both as people that can contribute in their own right and as people who can be effective in making change. And finally, we think it's really important working with groups of young people to foster a sense of belonging. So we think often for young people in philanthropic organisations, and likewise for older organisations as well, but it's a really important part of our social lives. And we've found that, for example, our Auckland branch developed out of a strong friendship with somebody who was going there. And we think so we have a huge emphasis in our organisation around just all getting together and spending time together. And as Heath mentioned, we hold 3 retreats a year in the middle of an island to get everybody together and to get talking. And we also believe that it's really, really important in those instances to be creating opportunities for people and linking people up to stuff that might help them in the future.
Some of the challenges, and there are quite a few of running an organisation like this, gaining credibility. One of the greatest and hardest things that we've had to grapple with is the fact that our existence has stemmed from Rethinking Crime and Punishment and the Robson Hannon Trust that already existed in its own right. In part, our credibility has come from that relationship and from the connections and the people involved in the relationship. And that's a great thing. We acknowledge that actually without them we wouldn't be here today. However, it's important also for our members to be recognised in their own right. And yeah, basically we don't want to be considered for the rest of it, the life of our organisation, to be purely just the youth branches, as Emily said before. Another challenge is partnerships, and this is all about making effective use of resources and the knowledge and expertise that already exists. There's no point recreating the wheel every time you do something. And for us, at least, it can be sometimes easy to work in a vacuum. In our case, this is not really a lack of willingness to engage with other organisations, but more the lack of time or capacity to engage with those potential partners. We have 2 great examples, as we've talked about. One, the Office of the Children's Commissioner, and we think that the outcome from that partnership were really, really great and really effective. They approached us because they knew that we were younger and maybe more effective engaging young people. Also, we've engaged with the New Zealand Drug Foundation, and that is an ongoing project, hopefully, that will see some results from this year. Duplication of resources. We're very aware that, like I said before, there's a point in recreating the wheel everywhere you go. And so therefore, this is a really huge driver in our approach in Dunedin and Christchurch. As Emily said before, we're going down there to scope out whether there's an interest in Just Speak, but also, more importantly, we're interested to see whether there's a need. We know of existing organisations which may be already progressing our kaupapa down there, and we don't want to duplicate them purely for the sake of duplication. So I guess the next challenge for us will be how do we effectively work with those existing organisations so that we can both support each other. Another challenge for us is time commitment. And a lot of our members are voluntary. Well, actually not. Basically, 99% of them are voluntary. We have one paid position in our organisation, an administrator, and we're very grateful for that. But it also, I guess, the group of people that work for Just Speak are often passionate about social justice issues and therefore are involved in many different other groups that are trying to all do different things. And this means that we often don't have as much time as perhaps we'd like. A lot of Just Speak workers are also, we hold down day jobs, and this means that often these jobs are quite demanding and draining in themselves, and if you have to go to work and work on these issues all day, every day, and then the evenings spend your time learning about more issues and advocating for change, it becomes quite exhausting. One of the other challenges is negotiating the different elements of leadership, and this is something that Emily and I have definitely found. For us, working on both a governance level and a management level has its challenges. They're quite different roles and they have different expectations. And so, again, because of time commitments and things like that, they can be quite difficult. But both necessary. We don't want to be an organisation that isn't making effective use of our resources. Group conflict as well. Just Speak has been incredibly lucky. We haven't actually had much group conflict. Generally, everyone's really respectful of each other and gets along with each other. However, this is something that we've made quite a effort in actively working on so that it doesn't become an issue. But it's something that I guess needs to be kept in mind, particularly with organisations that have young people that are of similar age. As Stacey and Carver also alluded to, I really admire their willingness to look into sustainability of their group. I think that is definitely an issue for a lot of young organisations and a lot of non-government organisations. For us, at the moment, that's probably a challenge that we haven't yet looked at, and in due time, when our organisation is at that organisational development stage, that will be something that we'll look at.
So that's quite a lot of challenges, but what we really also want to talk about today is, so why do we do it? What are the benefits? Why do young people make for an effective philanthropic organisation? So firstly, because the picture relates to this, I'm going to talk to the fact that we found young people in our organisation to be innovative and to be thinking about things in new and different ways. So a few examples of that. Firstly, using new technologies to convey ideas. So this here is an infographic designed by one of the people in Just Speak to portray the number of young people in the youth justice system who've been in trouble with the law. And actually yesterday we had perhaps our biggest media success to date for Just Speak through the same young person designed a quite cool-looking design which quite clearly depicted the rates of young Pākehā and young Māori who are apprehended by the police, the percentage of them who were prosecuted in the court. And it basically shows that if you're Māori, you're way more likely to be prosecuted in the court. So quite simplistic. There's obviously limitations to data like that, but what he did was he put it in a really simple, really effective way on our blog, and more so than any of our press releases to date, and we put out a lot of press releases, that one caught the media's attention, and we got radio interviews, TV interviews, print media, all linked into that. And I think that's a really good example of somebody who's really in touch with new things that are going on in the world of technology.
I guess it was also an example that was picked up by the media and then subsequently picked up by Tariana Turia, and was actually brought up in the House yesterday, which I guess for us is a real success that shows that no other organisation or government organisation had put together those statistics in that way and shown that discrepancy. And for us, it was a real example of how young people can actually hold the government to account and question some of the things that are happening in this argument.
The second way in which I think members of our organisation being innovative is in our approaches to contentious issues. So like I kind of alluded to earlier on, with often the debate around criminal justice, well, even the fact that I'm using the word debate suggests two sides, and often in the media it's one person's voice versus another person's voice. Somebody advocates for the offender, somebody advocates for the victim. That's the article. But one of our members came up with the idea last year that we should invite the Sensible Sentencing Trust onto our forum to have a forum centred around consensus and what do we agree on. Because essentially our organisation and the Robson Hannon Trust as a whole also cares a lot about victims' interests, and we thought that perhaps we could come to some consensus. We also engaged on what our points of difference were, and that sparked some lively debate. But the idea of I guess working in a collaborative way came from a young person in our organisation. And finally, a third innovative idea that someone's come up with in our organisation is holding forums that are interactive. So often I think you go to a forum and you sit passively and listen to people speak, which is kind of what I'm doing right now. So innovative. But a few members of our organisation came up with the idea that actually every forum on criminal justice issues should have an interactive element. And so, for example, we ran a forum on sentencing where we had the Binge Culture Collective, which is a youth theatre group, and to do role playing and workshops with people to make people kind of act out and think about their ideas. And we always have a group work component to our forums where people can sit down and discuss ideas. And that was also evident in our camp. So our camp was focused less around guest speakers, so we had a few of those, and more around what's called the food camp style, which is putting up a whiteboard like this one, dividing it into tables and getting people attending camp to write up what they wanted their sessions to be. Could actually be really, really cool. I mean, people here might have been to food camp, but worked really, really well because young people came along, said, I really want to talk about gangs, write that in 10:30 on the day, turn up and talk with other young people about gangs. So it's the idea of sharing our own expertise as well as listening to the people. Further things that we think have been great about young people we work with in Just Eat is the hopefulness and the idealism we've alluded to earlier. Feels like there's a lot of energy, and I'm constantly getting energy from the number of people who really do believe that we can make a difference. The time and energy that people have, I guess a lot of us are freed up in a lot of ways that perhaps we won't be in 10 years' time, that we can give to commit to Just Eat. And finally, I think, in the sense of making change, we think young people are a voice too often missing. So there's another good reason why you should have a youth philanthropic organisation. And finally, of course, like the obvious point is that young people are the future. We're going to inherit this justice system. We're going to inherit New Zealand. So having young people making change now and starting to think about these issues, we think is really valuable.
I guess I'd just like to finish on a little bit of a story about a young person who I think kind of epitomised the objectives and aims of Just Speak and the worthiness of it. His name, I'll call him Sam for the purpose of the story, but he was a young person that I work with through Challenge 1000, involved in the criminal justice system in the youth court, and unfortunately, too many of the young people involved in that system, lack of education and difficult home life, which meant that he was disengaged from lots of different issues, and he probably never really heard the word criminal justice system before, let alone really understood all of the things about it. So I've worked with Sam for a long time, and I felt that he's shown the real potential for leadership and the ability to articulate his ideas really well. So I invited him onto the camp that we ran. Now this camp was quite diverse actually in the young people attending it. However, it was a very different kind of situation for him, something that he had never really experienced. I guess for me, it was really, really great to see how he was appreciated and valued in that environment. He afterwards he told me that it was the best thing that he'd ever been to, and that he really loved how people listened to what he had to say and actually valued his contribution to conversations. It was also, I guess, really great for me because he obviously felt comfortable to share some of his life story with people, and because it was such a safe environment that he shared some of his experiences and let some of the attendees know at the camp about some of his run-ins with the Lord. And I guess for me, one of the particular highlights that I still remember is we were sitting in a group of about, I don't know if the picture's up there, but there was a group of about 15 of us, and we were talking about it and we were saying, you know, one of the main aims of Just Speak is about getting young voices heard of people who are directly affected by the criminal justice system. That's the point. You know, academics and people can talk about it all day, but really what we're interested in is getting young people directly affected. Oh, this is a very great. So we said, we put the question out to the whole group, how can we make people get their views heard? And he came back and said, well, maybe if people just gave us 2 cents, we could turn it into $2. And you know, the sentence wasn't remarkable in itself, but it was more so remarkable in the sense that that became the catch cry of the camp for the rest of the camp. We went to Parliament and presented lots of things, and one of the key moments of the song that we presented was him yelling out that line, and everyone, you know, got really excited about it. And I guess I tell the story not only because it highlighted to me, and maybe I haven't articulated it very well, but how small opportunities that we can provide through receiving grants can actually make a lot of difference in someone's life, and also provide opportunities for a voice that may not be heard. But I thought it also accurately reflected the point of why we're here today. We believe that getting young people involved in philanthropy is something really worthwhile, and in a sense, you might give us your cents, or it's a lot more than 2 cents actually, it's quite a significant amount of money, but hopefully with that funding that we've really generously received, we are able to turn that into $2. That together with the funding that we receive, combining that with the time and energy and passion of the young people that we work with, we do create outcomes like getting things recognised in the House of Parliament as yesterday. So I guess I'll finish on that, and thank you very much for listening to us. Hopefully we've given you some thoughts to go away with, even maybe a little bit of a challenge hopefully, and yeah, we look forward to continuing the conversations afterwards.
Wow. It's time. If you've got any questions or comments, you don't need to come up with money.
Have you considered, sorry, somebody being me?
Yeah.
Have you considered putting representative or representatives and young people at the home, like young nationals, for example, give you better access to
I guess we do have some connections with young people who are in those parties or kind of really interested in politics. We try to stay as non-partisan as we can. We're primarily education and awareness-based organisation, and although we do we put press releases and things like that, it's more to raise the awareness and consciousness of the debate. We're not really trying to advocate too strongly for one political party, because we know that actually that's not that effective in this space.
look at it from the point of view of to initiate change, you've got to get the right ear.
Definitely, and we are quite successful actually in talking to ministers. We've met with representatives of most political parties, and a lot of them, actually we held a forum last night that we had a representative from Labour and National at that forum, representing the government and the opposition's point of views in that debate. So yeah, it's a great one.
And linked to that, I guess we're really interested as well in policy makers and how do you affect people who are making policy, and we're starting to try in conjunction with Kim Whitman, who runs who's just finished being the executive director of the Robson Hannon Trust, to come up with a bit of a plan of how, when actually is it relevant to impact policy, and how do you engage at the right time. So we've got a lot of strategic thinking to do. But yeah, I agree, and I think it's I think having people from a diverse range of political parties is really important. and sometimes we have to work quite hard to make sure that we are being representative of different aspects of the political spectrum. Yeah.
My question is, how do you deal with adults, and I mean this in the sense of non-young people, adults who are old and crusty who really don't quite believe you or may just listen to you on a token level or without actually saying it, kind of who what you're trying to do. Yeah.
It's something that we don't have a lot of control over, to be honest. We can't really control that old person. It's a pity. It's a pity that they're living out on the contribution that we're making, and unfortunately for them, we can't really have much control over them. But obviously, I guess we try to present the best argument or presentation to make, and then hopefully that really connects with them. I think the importance is really relationship and understanding, and if we can engage with adults, like you say, who want to poo-poo all our ideas, and get them to actually understand perspective is far more effective.
I think also we recognise as well that different work we do has an impact on different people. So I think to some of those adults, maybe us holding a camp and getting young people talking about things might not be so effective. But when we produced a written report on Māori and the criminal justice system and launched it at Munikokiri, all of a sudden a different kind of group of people were interested. So I think we realise often that it's the medium through which a message is delivered, which doesn't stop us doing what we want and doing things that we think are driven by young people. But I think we also recognise that too, and that it's good as a young organisation to be quite diverse in how you give out your message. Yeah.
So you two are incredibly well educated and articulate about what you're doing, and I'm assuming that not everybody who comes to Just Speak or participates comes from law school or that kind of background, and that you're encouraging people at all different levels of education and experience to participate. So I'm wondering how you train people who don't come from an educated background necessarily to, you said your camp to speak publicly and earn that kind of respect. I think, there's an assumption from adults that adults need to come in and teach you how to do that, but I'm wondering how your governance works in that you coach those who are coming along, and eventually you'll probably age out of being this leadership, so you're sort of how you're grooming the future leadership of the organization.
Yes, we're well aware of those challenges, and I guess one of our work streams called the Outreach stream is particularly focused on that. So the three objectives of that is to reach out to communities and young people that might not be heard in the criminal justice debate, but it's also to ensure that we are training, we're thinking about how do we let young people, we are young ourselves, but other younger people to take on our roles once we get too old. It's a really difficult thing, and I guess it's my day job really to work with young people of all different backgrounds, and I think in the same way that this opportunity has really helped me learn about lots of different things. Like I was interested in the criminal justice debate, but I probably wasn't knowledgeable years ago. And now I think I've grown, and in a similar way, I think we can provide opportunities to grow in the same kind of vein.
I think the way that we want to approach getting a diverse range of people involved is firstly through I think so much of it is how you introduce people to your organisation. So when we ran our camp, we were very conscious that a lot of us speak in policy language and submission writing and blah blah blah. It's not accessible to many young people. So we decided to kind of start it out with an experience focus, and we ran the first night of our camp was an exercise called the Rivers of Life, and we got young people into groups of about 10 and got them to draw their river of life and tell kind of their life story to the group. And I think that was a really cool way to start the form off by being actually not about how smart you are, whether you went to law school, blah, blah, blah. We're interested in your story. But that's obviously a weekend experience, and that's not that long-term development into the organisation, and that's something we're thinking about a lot. And one of the ways that we'd like to do it is through the outreach team, as Heath was talking about, running sort of like forums and workshops with schools, but running them on a kind of ongoing basis. So we'd like to partner up with a community organisation where we can go out and with young people in that organisation maybe 5 times and get to know them and build a relationship. And then I guess just mentoring and supporting people to take on leadership roles in organisations, so encouraging their voice to be heard in a meeting, all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, it is a challenge, and like we're well aware of it, and we really, really want Just Speak to constantly be diversifying and to be attracting a younger group of people. And yeah, we're always interested in ideas of ways to do that.
What expertise you might have in that field?
Yeah.
Email us.
Or tell us. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. I just wanted to touch on Challenge 2000 though. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I thought that the presentation was going to be based on both, but is it really more about Just Speak?
So I guess it is more about Just Speak. I didn't really want to come here and confuse you all talking about 2 different organisations in depth. Although
I think though they're really complementary, and some of the questions that this lady just asked, I think is really quite relevant, because the work that Challenge 2000 does is really important. And what I wanted to ask you was, because I thought you guys had gone under, so I'm really pleased to know. That you are here, and maybe it's putting a plug, and it might be inappropriate, but I will anyway. Is that I was on a school board, a large school board in the Wellington area for a long time, and chaired the discipline committee, and we would refer our students to Challenge 2000, and that was always the first preference, because whatever you guys did, they always came back to school and integrated back into school life. Whereas if we sent them to other alternative schools, they dropped out, and then they eventually went on to be a criminal statistic. So I'm really pleased to hear that you are still here, and a little bit disappointed that you didn't sort of touch a bit more on the work that you do, because I think it's really valuable, and it complements what you're doing with Just Speak. And I'm not sure if the question that you asked was the people, the students, the young people that you work with in Challenge 2000, are they involved with Just Speak?
Some of them are. I guess it's like one of the consultation that we did with the Office of the Children's Commissioner, for instance, was we did have a group from Challenge 2000 who contributed to that. Yeah, thank you so much for.
Well, because I just think that would be really important, because a lot of those youth and those students, what it is a bit of confidence, give them a bit of confidence, self-respect, and change lives.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your presentation.
Cheers. I think I mean it's a natural kind of marriage for me in terms of I do work during the day with young people. And I see a lot of the issues day to day, and we constantly advocate. The reason why you can't refer to us anymore is because we don't run an alternative school because of lack of funding. And yeah, it's sorry, it's kind of sad because we were quite successful, and we did make a difference for a lot of young people. And I guess the reason why I'm passionate about Just Speak is because there's lots of people who are interested in these issues, and I see the real flow-on effect of the change in policy and law that can affect young people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the presentation. You mentioned pure movements, and I'm aware of groups young and old that are going into youth institutions and prisons doing some creative work. Do you do some programs where you're more with people?
Yeah, we'd love to do more of that kind of thing. Part of what we've sort of done at the outset, being a young organisation and realising that we're not a service provider, is trying to be like a kind of central port of call for opportunities like that. So we try and showcase to young people, hey, if you're interested in working, if you're actually working with people, like go and volunteer for PARS, Prisoners Aid and Rehabilitation, or go out and do stuff. Having said that, I think there would be a real place for Just Speak to do more things like that as time goes by, and I think it's really important. I mean, we've done a consultation with young people and residents and gotten a lot out of that. I think it's really important opportunities like that we really allocate a group of people who can really commit time and build relationships. But yeah, I mean, it's something I'm really interested in. I think if you want to represent or help or give people a forum to have their voices heard, you've got to actually really understand people in that position. And I think, yeah, I can see huge value in that, and that's something that Kim is influential through doing stuff like that and knowing the realities that people in prison face. So, yeah. Our next forum, actually, just a little plug for our monthly forums, we're running a 3-forum series at the moment on imprisonment and what are our alternatives. So yesterday we hosted one on kind of like the why do we put people in prison, economic, moral kind of questions. Our last one's going to be on the alternatives, but the middle one is going to be on what are the social realities of prison. So we've built up some quite strong relationships with members of Just Speak who've experienced the prison system themselves, and a couple of them want to share that with people. So I think that's going to be a really, really special opportunity. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Just to comment, really, one of your first stats at the beginning, you said 73% of people who have interviewed have actually demonstrated being able to assist themselves in terms of prison use, and that's really because actually if we were able to address child abuse in this country, our stats in terms of people
Definitely, and I think the sadness is that a lot of people don't understand those statistics and really understand why people go to prison. And it's not often because it is because they make choices, but it's often because of a lot of those factors that lead to where they are making a choice from. And that's the key point of our organisation, is trying to raise awareness and consciousness about those issues.
And just my other point, I have read the report that you referred to, it's in the media. I'm a criminal lawyer, and the judges make decisions in terms of prison or not. It depends on the level of offence. I mean, there's a whole lot of factors. The level of offence, the previous, whether there's remorse, and whether there's an alternative offence. So there are a whole lot of factors that a judge takes into account.
Yeah.
And it's not just this, take for a moment to think that it's based on race.
Yeah.
There's numerous factors.
It's really true. Emily probably can't reveal where she was, but I work in the youth courts, and I'm aware of all those factors that influence sentencing. What our statistics actually showed was that if someone is arrested for an offence, the likelihood of them then going to court for that offence or being prosecuted for that offence was actually higher if you were Māori than Pākehā. So it's pre-sentence, it's pre all of those factors coming into account. It's not that kind of black and white. It's it's more to do with actually that kind of indicates well, why is that difference there? Is it partly because there's a systemic bias in the way that police prosecute or not? And I don't profess to know the answer to that, and I don't think anyone in New Zealand does. But I guess our point is we should maybe put some resources into exploring that a bit more, so we fully understand why, if you get arrested and you're more likely to be prosecuted than Pākehā.
Yeah, I guess it means I think I see a really key role of our organisation is asking questions and not necessarily purporting to know the answers, because it's an extremely complex issue, and there are lots of reasons why people get prosecuted for offences when they go to court, for sure, but getting people talking and getting people questioning the question sometimes I guess.
And just my other point in terms of, I suppose, units of mention, is the education businesses, and I was really strongly encouraged for some people because there's a lot of organisations
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. There are so many opportunities out there, and that's just making sure we're really in tune to it. Yeah.
For us all as citizens, I mean, they're the ones that are at corrections and interventions, and yes, to a budget, which I just think the quality makes a decision in terms of citizens.
Just very quickly, mine's not a question, it's more a comment. I would just like to say it's probably one of the children's but you're two very impressive and passionate young New Zealanders about what you do. You're obviously involved with a number of like-minded people as well. I'd just like to say that what it's highlighted to me today, both with your presentation and also the young people from your organisation, is that it's a seal, I think, as we as older New Zealanders in our organisations, it's not just to involve you in your organisation, not to engage you, but fully involve you in your organisations. And the key things that I took out of this, and not that, but also, the motivation, the enthusiasm, the youthfulness, the different perspective, and that as well. And also Stephen through the Tinder Foundation and some of the philanthropic work he's got recently, and there's the involvement of young New Zealanders in directorships, etc. through some larger and some companies that public and non-public listed ones. But as I get enthusiasm, there's fresh ideas that are very, very, very nice from New Zealanders involved in the organisations.
Thank you.
And thank you from me, because we've just done a bit I could do. That's really been inspiring, I think. That, would you say young people's voice too often missing in current debates? Well, it gives me such hope, really, that you've got the energy, you've got the wisdom, you've got the strategy. It's very humbling. So I really very much thank you for coming. And likewise with our friends from the States. I mean, something that struck me is these aren't just people stepping up and doing the role that's been set for them. They're people that are stepping up and creating ways of doing things. So I hope, like me, you're filled with hope in these sessions. I hope you can stay around for any more questions. Thank you very much for coming. Sorry.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind of thing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's telling me all about it.
Oh,
So
great.
Every 80% of people.
Yes, yeah.